If you are watching this, then I'm guessing, like me, you are an Ironman trying to go for that elusive bow of Ferdinand. But you might feel stuck because without Rigour or Augury, it just feels like an impossible task. When each attempt could take roughly 12 minutes, a 1 out of 400 drop rate is already a potentially 100 hour plus grind. So consistency is king if you want to avoid burnout. This is the same spot that I was in, and I spent a lot of time and deaths trying to come up with a consistent way to get kills without relying on these prayers or max stats. So let's jump into it. The only real mandatory requirement is to have completed the Song of the Elves quest. The gauntlet can be reached by going here in Prifddinas and entering this portal. I think the minimum stats that you can get away with by using this method are 80 plus attack, 85 plus strength, 85 plus defense, 90 range, 70 plus prayer, 85 plus mage, and 90 plus HP. These are the lowest I would say you're going to be able to get away with and keep getting kills consistently. You could possibly get away with lower attack and strength because the highest level monster we're going to be killing with melee is level 48. Our main damage output will be with mage and range, in that order. The DPS is kind of strange, but you will primarily be using mage. The reason for this is even at 85 mage, you will still do more DPS with mage until 97 range. You can see here the DPS difference. That being said, getting higher than 85 mage really only produces a minor DPS increase, so 85 will do plenty. If you do want to increase your odds, I would actually recommend increasing your defense, as this will help you survive better. These are the stats that I've been working with, and I've had no problems getting consistent kills and almost never die anymore. So to enter the Corrupted Gauntlet, you can right click this portal here and click Enter Corrupted Gauntlet. However, if you've never completed at least one normal mode gauntlet, you will need to complete one to unlock the corrupted version. However, it's significantly easier, and all the tactics we're going to be going over are applicable to normal mode as well. I do have a few recommendations on settings within RuneScape and some plugins in RuneLite that'll really make your life a lot easier. The first is, please use F keys. If you are still manually clicking your inventory and prayer tabs, you're really going to have a tough time in the Hunllef fight because there's so much chaos going on already. You need every edge you can get. Now, if you've never used F keys before, I understand it can be intimidating at first, but we're only going to be using two, our inventory and prayer, and really this is a skill that has so much crossover to every different boss fight in RuneScape that it really is a necessary skill to learn at some point, so might as well be now. My second recommendation is to go to the plugin hub and download these two RuneLite plugins. These plugins are definitely not required by any means, but they will make your life much easier when inside the Corrupted Gauntlet. The first one is called Gauntlet Minimap. This will display all the different resources you've discovered in the rooms onto your minimap. The second one is called The Gauntlet. It has a little bit more to it. It outlines different resources and monsters in the environment, and what we really want it for is this resource overlay. This will act as a countdown to tell you when you've collected all the necessary resources. You can set what you want these values to be here, and these are the values that we will be using for this video. If you're already familiar with the absolute basics of the Gauntlet prep mechanics, feel free to skip to the next section. There's a timestamp below. There are 5 main materials you'll be gathering during the prep phase: corrupted ore from the mining vein, corrupted bark from the trees, linum tyrannum from the cotton plants, girm leaves from the herb patches, and lastly, paddlefish. The first 3 are used to craft your crystal armor, and the herbs are used to create engyl potions, which act as both prayer and stamina pots in one. The paddlefish are going to be your food source. All monsters will drop corrupted shards, which is the main form of currency in the Corrupted Gauntlet, and have a chance to drop some various items at different rates. These items include weapon frames used to create weapons, paddlefish, girm leaves, and corrupt teleport crystals, which can be used to teleport back to the hub at any time. Low tier monsters range between levels 32 and 48, and here are the different drops they have. Mid tier monsters range between levels 64 and 102, and they drop all the exact same items as the low tier, except at a higher frequency and amount. High tier monsters are demi-bosses that are all level 258. These are special monsters used to create your tier 3 weapons, and they exclusively spawn in these 4 locations. The ranger will drop a corrupted bowstring, the major a corrupted orb, and the melee a corrupted spike. You will need to use your protection prayers on these monsters. The bear you're going to use protect from melee, the dark beast you're going to use protect from range, and the dragon you will use protect from mage. They also all share a similar drop table as the previous low and mid tier monsters. Okay, with all that covered, we can finally get ready to start some actual attempts. This method will be broken up into 3 phases, but sometimes with good RNG, phases 1 and 2 can kind of be combined. That being said, we aren't going to depend on good RNG. The first thing you're going to do when spawning into the gauntlet is to go to whichever of these 2 doors you spawned closer to. Then you're going to follow this path highlighted in green in either a clockwise or counterclockwise rotation depending on which door you entered first. As you're going through, you're going to check the adjacent rooms highlighted in blue. The reason you're doing this is to see if there's any extra resources that you might have missed. At first this might seem counterintuitive given the very strict time limit, but my philosophy is to go for what you can see versus what might be around the corner. Everything in the gauntlet is very RNG heavy, so we want to try and eliminate as much of that as possible, so always just take that first thing you see. Here are the total amount of items we are looking for before we enter the Hunllef fight. However, it's unlikely you will acquire all of them on your first go around, so here's a list of what should be your main objective before you head back to the main hub. However, gather as much of the 3 supplies used to create your armor as possible now if you see them. Also, in the first phase, I can't stress this enough, ignore food. Resist the temptation of picking up food drops or fishing because it really will only hinder you, and when gathering supplies, it becomes a clog in your inventory and you are more than likely going to have to waste time dropping them only to pick them back up later. As a quick example, look how slow it is to drop a full inventory of food and pick it back up. 25 seconds. That is 5.55% of your already very limited time spent standing in one spot, effectively doing nothing. Here are the basic tactics you should follow when gathering your first round of supplies. Only kill the low tier monsters with melee. After killing 3, you will have a guaranteed drop of the weapon frame. The mid tier monsters, in my opinion, just aren't worth killing with melee as it's far too slow. When mining, woodcutting, or harvesting, completely deplete the resources. Even though we only need 7, collect 9 and drop the 2 extra. It only takes a few extra seconds, but you have a chance to get corrupted shards from every action, so this will help you acquire all that you need a little bit faster. Even if you forget or don't need to check the adjacent rooms along the way, make sure you at least check these 3 rooms, as these are the rooms that the bosses can spawn. We want to make sure we at least get one of the bosses that we want. The bosses that we're looking for are either the Ranger, the Major, or both. I personally avoid the Bear because doing melee in the Hunllef fight is just a little frustrating with the floor patterns, and it's hard to find time to actually get enough damage in to make it worth it. When you are checking the boss rooms, make sure to intentionally click either side of the door before opening it, because if the boss sees you when he spawns, he will instantly attack you, and if you don't have the right protection prayer up, he can hit very hard. Lastly, the dying animation of monsters takes a very long time, and it covers your loot, so instead of waiting for the animation to finish or trying to right-click the items, you can actually hold shift and left-click, allowing you to click the walk here option instead, so you can click through them to get to your loot faster. So in my opinion, what makes dealing with the sometimes frustrating RNG elements of the prep phase bearable is be willing to reset. Resetting early if things don't work out and wasting 2 minutes instead of potentially 7+ really will save you many headaches and overall just makes this more enjoyable. So here's what my criteria of what warrants a reset. The first being if you weren't able to at least get tier 1 gear. Usually this will happen if you get a bunch of 1 or 2 of the same resource but the game just refused to give you a third. The second is if you checked the first 3 boss rooms and didn't find either the Major or the Ranger or only 1 bear. A small caveat to this is if you do find 2 bears, it's still worth killing. The reason for this is because you will never get duplicate tier 3 weapon upgrades. So you can kill 1 bear for his corrupted spike, and then the next bear you will have a 50-50 chance of getting either the orb or the bowstring, and this applies to all the different demi-bosses. Additionally, you can then use your corrupted spike on the pestle and mortar to get 80 extra shards. If you have gathered 7 of either the corrupted bark or the corrupted ore, drop your axe or pickaxe respectively as you won't be needing them anymore. At this point, you should have collected enough materials to create your tier 1 gear, 1 annual potion, and 1 tier 2 weapon, so it's time to head back to the hub and get to crafting. Create your gear in 1 vial using the singing bowl, and always make a tier 2 staff as it will be your best damage output. Before heading back out, make sure to use your vial on the water pump, but if you forget, you can always use the vial on any fishing spot as well. Once you've finished crafting your gear, head back to the demi-boss or bosses you located to obtain your tier 3 weapon upgrade. This is a small optimization, but I usually will create my potion while fighting the demi-boss as it won't interrupt your attacking action, as long as you only do one of the 3 actions needed per attack. Another option is you can also create your potion while you're running around. To create the potion, use your Gearm leaf on the vial of water and your shards on the pestle and mortar to create corrupted dust, which will consume 10 shards. Then use this dust on your unfinished potion. Once you've killed your first demi-boss and acquired a tier 3 weapon upgrade, you have 2 options. Option 1, you can take this route highlighted in green to your next location by passing by the singing bowl and creating your tier 3 weapon and any tier 2 armor you can. I would only really do this if you already have enough shards and materials to make 2 pieces of tier 2 armor. It costs 60 shards per piece. And creating your tier 3 weapon costs no shards. Option 2, head in either of these diagonal paths, depending on which one you're closer to your next location and kill your second demi-boss. Regardless of your choice, on your way to your next location, finish gathering any materials you are still missing for full tier 2 armor and 2 more annual potions. Now that you've acquired a real weapon, it's worth killing all the mid-tier monsters you come across as they will drop a ton of shards. Any remaining inventory space can be used to gather food since you've freed up space creating your tier 1 armor. Once you've defeated your second demi-boss and collected all the necessary resources for full tier 2 armor, a second tier 3 weapon, and 3 annual potions, use your teleport crystal to head back to the main hub. This isn't required, but if you do have 40 extra shards remaining, craft a second teleport crystal, although it is not uncommon to have gotten a second one or even a third from killing monsters along your way. Now that everything is crafted up, drop any extra materials and tools. Your inventory should look something like this, but make sure not to drop your food or teleport crystal if you happen to have one. If you didn't happen across any fishing spots, follow this path around the Hunllef as there will always be at least one fishing location with 3 spawns. Even if you don't acquire all 16 fish, the Hunllef fight is still more than doable with less. Once you have all your fish, head back to the main hub to cook them. Cooking in the Gauntlet is significantly faster than anywhere else in Gielinor, so you only need 10 seconds to cook 16 paddlefish. Just make sure you're back in the hub with at least this much time left. Now we are fully prepared for our Hunllef fight. Drop everything in your inventory aside from your potions, weapons, and fish. And set up your inventory like this. We specifically want our second tier 3 weapon in this position in your inventory. This is to minimize our mouse movement when switching our protection prayers and weapons. Before entering the room, you'll enable 3 prayers. The first is Protect from Range, as the Hunllef will always begin with range. The second is either Mystic Might or Eagle Eye, depending on which attack style you are starting with. This will depend on what the Hunllef's starting protection prayer is. The third is Steel Skin. Since we don't have Rigour or Augury, we are going to be using Steel Skin to help mitigate some damage. This prayer is a lot better than it might seem at first, but that 15% extra defense makes a world of difference, and the prayer drain of both Eagle Eye or Mystic Might plus Steel Skin is identical to just Rigour or Augury, so this combo is honestly a decent budget version. If your timer happens to run out before you get a chance to enter the fight on your own, you'll be automatically teleported into the arena. But don't panic, just prioritize enabling your Protect from Range prayer. You can do it while you're being teleported. Then attack the boss and finish enabling all your other prayers and sorting out your inventory. Before getting into the fight, I just want to give a disclaimer. There's a lot of things to cover, so you might be feeling a bit of information overload, but just take each section bit by bit and don't feel like you need to be perfect from the get-go. Just jump in there and experience it, and the pieces will fall into place, I promise. Hunllef Mechanics. The Hunllef has 5 different types of attacks you need to look out for. The first 2 are his basic range and mage attacks, which he will switch between every 4 of his attacks. He will play these animations when switching, but I usually just listen for this sound effect. As it doesn't actually matter what he's switching to, you will always just cycle between range or mage. I should mention, there is a plugin called Hunllef Helper that many people use to tell them when to switch prayers. But in my opinion, it takes way too much babysitting to make function well, since you have to manually enter in information while fighting, and if it gets out of sync, it's going to do more harm than good. So my advice, just listen for the sound. His third attack is a pink mage-based attack only done during his mage phase and will disable your prayers. If you're familiar with the Vorkath fight, it's a very similar mechanic. When he does this, Prioritize turning your protection prayers back on, and keep in mind, this attack does count as one of his attacks to switch his cycle, so he might attack you with this and then immediately switch to range. His fourth attack is a typeless stomp, meaning you cannot protect from it. He will only do this attack if you walk underneath him, and this attack does not count towards the 4 attacks for him to switch styles. His last attack is random, and he will spawn tornadoes that chase you around the room. These tornadoes are honestly the real boss fight, and I'm going to go over them in much more detail later. This attack also does not count towards his 4 attack cycle. The Hunllef will also be using protection prayers. While his starting prayer is random, every switch after this will be determined from what you attack him with. He will switch prayers every 6 of your attacks that aren't the type that he was praying, and he will switch to pray whatever the 6th successful hit was. Also, it doesn't matter if any of the hits were zeros, they just need to be of the correct type. You don't need to bother counting his attacks, however, as it's always displayed over his head what he's praying against. Floor patterns. The floor within the arena will have areas that will damage you for between 10 to 20 damage every game tick if you are standing on them. This always kind of felt counterintuitive to me, but the floor is red when it's safe to walk on, and orange when it's not. The amount of time it takes to switch colors changes depending on the Hunllef's health bar, but you have about 2 seconds to move. There are 2 different pattern sets it will randomly switch between depending on the boss's health. The first set displayed here only when the boss's health bar is above 1/3, and the second set displayed here is only when he is below 1/3. Here's an overlay of all the different floor patterns on top of one another. As you can see, some tiles are much safer than others, so I would recommend marking these tiles. These can act as your reset points. The Hunllef doesn't move around very much during the fight, so there are some spots he can be that make certain floor patterns much more difficult. Specifically this one, as you can find yourself trapped with no clear path to safety if the Hunllef is centered because his hitbox is so big. There are 2 ways of dealing with this. The first and much safer way is to wait at the door before entering the fight until he moves into an ideal position. I usually wait for him to walk near a wall or in a corner, but really anywhere that isn't directly centered should work just fine. The second and much riskier strategy is to try and move him by walking underneath him. Now I said before that he will stomp on you if you do this, however, if you walk diagonally at the corner, he will randomly move in a direction and not stomp on you. Tornadoes. Now I'm going to go into more detail about the true boss of this fight, the tornadoes. Once you get used to the Hunllef's attack patterns, you will realize that since he's always on a fixed pattern, he is really only an obstacle with an HP bar. The tornadoes can do so much damage to you so fast that they really need to be given the top priority, as one mistake with them will likely end your attempt. In the beginning, he will only spawn 2 tornadoes, but by the end of the fight he'll be spawning 4 every time. They will chase you at about walking speed, but will usually come at you from all different directions, and each will do 10 to 20 damage per game tick if you're wearing tier 2 gear, and they last for 12 seconds. So if multiple stack up on you at once, you can take as much as 80 damage a tick.
That's a lot of damage!
In this tight space, running from the tornadoes and avoiding obstacles can be fairly overwhelming, but my biggest piece of advice is try not to panic and spam click all over the room. RuneScape pathfinding is pretty janky and you will end up dying. When it clicked for me how to safely avoid the tornadoes was actually thinking of it like a game of Snake, which I know might sound weird at first, but there really are a lot of similarities. You have to be very intentional with your clicks and kite the tornadoes around the room, never doubling back. The easiest way to do this is to run in square patterns. What I mean by this is running onto the longest path near you and then try to move only on either a horizontal or vertical lane, avoiding diagonal movement unless absolutely necessary. Here's an example of what I mean. I will first click my nearest lane and then run as far as I can on that one lane by intentionally clicking this corner tile, then rotating in a square formation, only really clicking the corners. You will notice that in the first 2/3 of the boss's HP, the floor patterns allow for long, comfortable lines. During these are when you want to try and get in some DPS on the Hunllef, but always prioritize the tornadoes. It's in the last 1/3 when the floor patterns don't allow for as safe of maneuvers, so while you're getting comfortable with the fight, don't worry about dealing damage here. Something that I recommend to help with these tight maneuvers is using the true tile indicator in RuneLite. Your true tile is always deceptively further from you than you might realize, and this will allow you to make your next move as quickly as possible. Lastly, it is possible to run right through the tornadoes without taking damage if you are 2 tiles away. However, only do this if you really have no other options because it's a pretty easy maneuver to mess up. If you do, however, get stuck in a tight spot, it's usually safer to run on the damaging floor as you will likely take less damage overall. When to eat. Since eating takes 3 game ticks, you want to try to avoid eating while attacking the Hunllef. To optimize this, you actually want to eat while running from the tornadoes. Now obviously you still need to prioritize running from them, so eat your food after you have clicked your next destination so you're never standing still. To help with this, you can start eating the second you see the Hunllef's animation to spawn tornadoes, so you don't need to eat so much while running. Consuming your potions, however, won't interrupt your attacking actions, so feel free to drink them while attacking the Hunllef. With that, you should have everything you need to start getting consistent kills. I really hope this guide helped you, and if it did, please like the video and subscribe for more. If there was anything you feel like I missed, or other guides you would like to see me make in the future, please let me know down in the comments. Have a good one, guys, and happy hunting.